Alrighty, how's everyone doing today? And welcome to my channel. Um, this channel is for educational purposes, and this is a segment that we call Your Blind Side, where I talk to people in the movement um, and point out things that they might not be looking at because they are busy looking at other very important things, but there might be some things that slip between the cracks. Um, and I'm not sure. Yesterday's episode, I don't think it recorded. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Um, and to be honest, I don't even remember what I was talking about. So I think this is number 27, but I'm not really sure. Um, but in general, I talk a lot about religious matters. Uh, this movement that we have is primarily Christian, and I see that as a major problem. The reason I see it as a major problem is not um, the people, not their actions, not the moral rectitude of the people. It is the fact that it is not true, because the New Testament of the Bible was written by the Romans as part of a psychological operation against the Jews. And this, uh, to a truther, if you do the digging, this would become obvious. But nobody's talking about it. Nobody is pointing at this research. But all you really need to do is look at the work of Josephus, the Roman historian of Jewish extraction, who writes a 7-volume work called War of the Jews, documenting the history of a war between the Romans and the Jews from 66 to 73 AD. The story in War of the Jews, more or less, is a template for the New Testament. In particular, the military campaign of General Titus, the Roman general in Judea, is a model for the ministry of Jesus. Everything that occurs to Titus in his military campaign also occurs to Jesus in his ministry. And it's not just a coincidence. The Romans put their signatures on it so that you can tell that it was intentional. And the Romans left behind a great deal of mockery and ridicule and humor, other humor, sarcasm, even. Um, and there are other codes. It's not just that one. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of codes. Um, and there are a dozen authors who have alerted us to this. A dozen authors just in the last 100 or so years, most of them still being alive now. And there have been authors throughout history who have also spoken of this in code. And so I'm not just shooting from the hip. I'm not just making this up. This is a long tradition and a long history that has been known, and it is not something that is really even controversial. It's over. It's conclusive, and it becomes more and more conclusive as the days go on. As I hear of new works that prove that Jesus existed or prove that the Bible was written by God, and I read them, and each one of these works is weaker than the last, and each one of these works relies upon the argument that there is no other way. There's no other way to explain this other than it was done by the work of God. Except that it could just as easily be explained that it is the work of the Romans. And ironically, the Roman emperors saw themselves as gods, and they legally were gods. The emperors in question here, Emperor Titus and his father, Emperor Vespasian, the two first Flavian emperors from 69 until 81 AD, they were literally gods, as was Julius Caesar and Augustus Caesar and Claudius Caesar. And they literally founded religions after their cult. But they founded other religions as well, including rabbinical Judaism, which was founded right at the same time that they founded Christianity. But it was targeted for a different group of Jews. Christianity was targeted for the more zealous, resistant Jews, whereas rabbinical Judaism was founded for the Pharisees, who were kind of more legally minded, and they were given by Vespasian a land grant to develop a campus where they would learn all the ins and outs of the Torah and other Old Testament writings, where they could hash it out and chop it up and comment on the various arcane aspects of the scriptures, so that they would be distracted away from political matters, which is exactly what the Romans wanted. In the case of Christianity, it was more that they wrote the Gospels in order to present and to invent and present a Jewish Messiah who was not a rebellious, political, military kind of leader who was going to help overthrow the Romans, but instead a Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and who believed in turning the other cheek and rendering unto Caesar and walking the extra mile, and at the same time being against the Jewish traditions and rituals like the animal sacrifices at the temple and the changing of money that was required for the animal sacrifices at the temple. And, when he overturns the tables of the money changers, we're supposed to take that as being a sign of Jesus' rebelliousness. But he's rebelling against the Jews, not the Romans. Now, the Romans may have seen that as being some type of, minor threat, because it was it was against like stability in general. So you could argue that, but really the story is fiction, so you don't even need to. But the parallels between this rabbinical Judaism and the Christianity in the Gospels are kind of staggering. Josephus, in his autobiography, talks about how he was once a Jewish military leader in this war, but he was captured after spending 3 days underground, and then he was resurrected. But that's a different set of codes. But then he was captured by Vespasian, the general, who becomes emperor later on. And he gives Vespasian the star prophecy, which in Jewish lore is not to be given to anyone who is not Jewish, but regardless, that's what Josephus did. The star prophecy is saying that I foresee that one day that you will become the new emperor, the new leader. And after a lot of rigmarole, which includes the murder of Emperor Nero and then the murder of 3 new separate Roman emperors who are appointed over the next 12 months, then Vespasian does get the call to become the new emperor. And when he does so, he, against all custom and logic, he pardons Josephus, brings him to Rome, and actually puts him up at a townhouse at Caesar's palace, adopts him as a member of his family, and gives him free rein to write the 7-volume history of the war. Now, the Pharisaic leader, Yohanan ben Zakkai, has a very similar story where he is captured. Unclear whether it was by Vespasian or by Titus. But he too resorts to the star prophecy and reports that one day you will become the new emperor. And, when that happens, and the story is much more involved. It involves he was trapped inside of Jerusalem during the siege of Jerusalem by Titus, and he shoots a bow, an arrow that has a message for the Romans. It says, "I will, surrender." And he gets carried out clandestinely by his followers in a casket, and then he gives a star prophecy, and he gets paid back by being given a campus to found this university where they start writing what becomes known as the Talmud and the Midrash. And so the stories are, neither one of them is believable, and both of them are the same, more or less. So something is very fishy. But the point is that the Romans, they invented literally at least half a dozen religions in the 1st century. So it would be a big stretch to say that the creation of Christianity is not among their modus operandi. It's exactly what the Romans would do, and it's exactly what the Romans did do, and it's exactly what a psychological operation would look like, because it's exactly what a psychological operation does look like. It looks exactly like the psychological operations that we've encountered in the 20th and 21st century. The Romans were masters at psychological propaganda, and Christianity is one of those things. But the point that I was eventually going to get to is that it's a mental illness, and it can't be something that we can move forward on as a movement. I would recommend people look into deism. Deism is a belief in one God who is good, who has given humans higher faculties of reasoning, intuition, wonderment, curiosity, and has printed the Word of God into nature itself. And the laws of physics, the laws of math, the laws of geometry, and enabled us to be able to understand the Creator or God directly through our higher faculties, not through some intermediary book that has been translated over and over and back over again over thousands of years, but to understand it directly. And many of the greatest founders of our country were avowed deists. Jefferson and Ethan Allen and James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Young, and several others that were borderline deists like George Washington. So this has a tradition and a history that we can lean into, but we seem to be just going forward with the Christianity thing, which is a mental illness. And I think you can really see that by reading both the works of Candida Moss in her book Myth of Persecution and Elaine Pagels in her Gnostic Gospels. They talk about these Christian martyrs. These people are sick. Christian martyrs, we're supposed to think that Christians were persecuted over the past centuries, and that there's the long history. These people were just trying to copy Jesus, and a lot of them literally were committing suicide as opposed to being martyred. They would literally beg the Romans for the Romans to kill them, and because they believed that if they were martyred the way that Jesus was martyred, they would go straight to heaven. They wouldn't have to do any purgatory. They wouldn't have to be in the ground waiting for the end of the world to be admitted to heaven. They would go straight there, and that would be that. So they figured an hour of suffering or a few hours of suffering was worth, doing the martyrdom. And they were incredibly aggressive, at least a lot of them. I mean, I'm sure that there were some Christians that were, crucified. But the whole thing is a myth, and it's so badly overstated. And it just shows the level of mental illness and mental gymnastics that Christians are willing to go for. Again, I was reading this guy Chuck Missler, who's supposed to be some kind of intelligence person. I don't know if he's an agent or still an agent, obviously. He's using, the last thing that I saw is he talks about how the New Testament is basically encoded in the Old Testament. So you can the New Testament is concealed within the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is revealed within the New Testament. And so he's always making these connections, which completely would go toward the Roman origins theory, because but he explains that God is the true author of the whole Bible, and that's why it's got all the continuity between Old and New Testament, as opposed to the Romans instead took control over the Septuagint, that was translated actually 3.5 centuries after we thought it was, because the only source that we have for that is Josephus, who is obviously not a credible source. And they inserted all the stuff that makes the connectivity between the New and the Old Testaments. But anyway, he talks about how Jesus was crucified on Passover, which is the 14th day of Nisan, and that Nisan is the 7th month of the year. And so then add 3 days to that, because he rose after 3 days, which is inaccurate. And so that means that Jesus was rose again on the 17th day of the 7th month, which is the same day that the flood of Noah ended. And he does this without any type of commentary or reflection on. Jesus rose according to the Gospels on the third day. It was 36 hours, not 3 days. And so he's being disingenuous when he tells you that it's the 17th day of the 7th month. It's clearly the 16th day of the 7th month. Because if he's crucified on Friday, that would be the 14th day. Saturday would be the 15th day, and Sunday would be the 16th day. And it was, for that matter, Sunday morning. So maybe even the 15th day. So, but he just, you have to think that his book is an operation to convince Christians of this, because it's so obvious that he is just making stuff up. And he again goes along with this, there is no other way to explain it except that God wrote the Bible. Well, could be that the Romans wrote the Bible. They had almost unlimited resources. They had, a fleet of high intellectuals of both Jewish, Roman, Greek history and mythology. They had full control of censorship, publishing, and distribution within the empire. And so it is totally absurd to think that anybody would be writing anything in the Roman Empire unless the Romans had sanctioned it and approved of it. But, he keeps going with this word of God. He's trying to track us into some type of end times thing. The end times is also completely fraudulent. All of these things can be easily just torn apart and thrown away. And I'm not even a hater. I criticize all religions, but especially all Western religions. And of the Western religions, Christianity is my favorite one. I like it better than all the other ones. And I think that it actually does result in people that have good morals and good character. The Romans had to put that into their gospels just to get people to believe it. And so they did put a lot of good stuff into the gospels, and people have reflected some of that. There's a lot of garbage in there too, but there is enough good stuff that you can cite, a couple hundred verses that you can live by. But that doesn't matter, because ultimately it's not true and it didn't happen. If we can acknowledge that, then we can move forward as truthers. But until then, we are lying truthers. I would say that, in spite of the fact that it can create people of good moral character, it still does leave this mental illness, which I consider to be a very minor mental illness, along the same lines as, being scared of heights or, some other phobia, but you Christians have this ability to kind of just have this overwhelming cognitive dissonance where everything happens because God did it, and everything happens because Jesus approved of it, and that everybody who is opposed to you is possessed by Satan or of Satan. And incidentally, Satan was also created by the Romans at the same time that they created Jesus. There's no Satan in the Old Testament. The word is mentioned a handful of times, each time referring to a human being. And we have imputed the concept of Satan into a number of non-satanic characters in the Old Testament, like the snake, and like a lot of Yahweh Elohim's competitors, like Baal and Shamash and Ashtoreth and Moloch. These characters are not Satan. They are Elohim. They are competing with Yahweh Elohim, who is also not a god. And Elohim is translated as God, but it is not. It just means some type of person that came down from above, and who is probably pretty powerful, maybe gigantic, and higher intelligence than us, but very, very, very flawed, with just about every type of personality disorder that you can think of. But I've gone into that over and over and again. But I just, I'm going to continue to go over it over and over again until somebody listens. So, and spreads this out, because this is not the way we're going forward. It just isn't. If it is, then we're going backward, because we're moving forward. The ancients would have been calling this the age of Aquarius, and Christianity is of the previous age of Pisces, at best. We can't just continue to move forward with psychological operations. At a certain point, the truth has to come in. But apparently all the millions of truthers out there haven't managed to dig this up. I have never heard any patriot talk about this in 10 years. Not once. Not an American. So, no, I mean, I've heard Americans talk about it, but not as part of the movement, not as part of this movement that is, supposed to be Christian. I just hear a lot of incantations, a lot of deference. As soon as the word Bible comes up, as soon as the word Jesus comes up, everybody just drops their critical faculties and just is willing to go in line and to bend the truth in order to go along and get along. Most of the truthers are probably not really that Christian. They just are going along with it because they know one or two other people who are really Christian, and they figure that, oh, well, they must know what they're talking about. Most of them are, busy figuring out the most recent psychological operation, or part of the plan, or whatever. That's all fine, but I'm just telling you, you got to dig a little bit deeper, and this needs to bubble up, because this is not the way that we're moving forward. Regardless of whatever I say, we're supposed to be going into the golden age, and we don't even know that Flavian means golden. Flavian, the dynasty of Caesars who invented Jesus. Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. They are the Flavians. They are the golden emperors. And so that's where we're headed, unless we wake up and veer the course toward deism. One God who is good, who we can understand through our God-given higher mental faculties, and through the Creator's word embedded in nature, and also the laws of physics, math, and geometry. That is how we can move forward on a path of truth. All right. Like, share, subscribe, comment, contribute, and remember to watch your blind side.